Hello, all, and welcome to week 6. My apologies for not sending um or not creating a video last week. I realized it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't feeling well for most of the weekend as well. I finally have my voice mostly back right now, which is good. The only issue is that I tend to cough a lot, but I'm prepared if that happens. So today we're going to talk about infant toddler development, physical and cognitive growth in early years, but really I'm also going to talk about newborn development, just key points I want to make sure everyone is aware of. Sometimes. All right, agenda. So I'm going to review some course updates. Then we'll do a quick review and recap, and that's where I'll discuss those key points on newborn development. And then I know this is an odd thing to introduce and not what was originally in the syllabus, but to me it will be important because it's very relevant when we're talking about infant toddler development, and that is early intervention. So I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to start on what is typical according to our normative charts and research on the development of young children. Focusing on physical and cognitive growth, and then we'll do a wrap up and exit ticket. So some course updates that I want to make you all aware of. Test 1 has been posted. I wanted you to have ample time. For me, tests are giving you the opportunity to show me that you understand what we're doing. It's not for me to catch you not being prepared. So you have all the time to complete this test. I will not extend the deadline because it has been available since the beginning of the month. But if you have questions, now's the time. Reach out. Week 6 of the discussion board is posted. It's very involved. So just be prepared. I have, I believe, a reading and video for you to look at related to early intervention, because I want you to understand why this is important when we're talking about child growth and development. And then review the syllabus. Once this is posted, I'm going to post my updated version of the syllabus. And then I have changed some of the topics covered for the remainder of the semester. Next week, we're going to talk about play, social emotional development, because those two, in my eyes, kind of go hand in hand. Next, I want you to make sure you have figured out where you're going to complete your observations, because you have 3. Well, really 2 formal observations, and then you are going to do an analysis of play. They are due at the end of the semester, but if you wait, you will definitely feel overwhelmed. So I would highly recommend getting these, at least the observation part, out of the way sooner than later. Your preschool observation is due November 27th, the infant toddler December 2nd, and then analysis of play December 9th. Because people are allowed to enter child care centers, I would prefer you visit an actual location. If you have issues, please let me know. It's very important that everyone gets this experience. It's so central to understanding child development to actually see it. So again, please start thinking about this. Please plan ahead. All right. I am working through grading, although it's a little bit easier for this class because we've had mostly quizzes. I'm going to calculate the completed exit tickets for the weeks that I've asked them to be completed. I'm going to review the discussion board. And I'm going to update my grade book because it's not currently updated with my assignments and how much they all are weighed. What I will tell you is if you are unhappy with your score on a quiz, I have no issue with taking it again. Especially the one I just graded, chapter 4. There were some questions that were trickier than others. So if you would like to retake that quiz, and I did provide very helpful feedback, let me know. I find that if you are repeatedly doing it, that's also another way of learning. I don't like for anything to be punitive. I want people to succeed. Okay. But I'm going to be calculating grades for all my classes this weekend, so I'm going to have an update to you by Monday. All right. Some key points on newborn development. And the reason I wanted to do this, I'm using animations in a way I haven't in a while, so hopefully this is helpful. This didn't come out as well as I wanted to, but so ignoring this big head piece, but first piece, newborns look weird. That's a newborn, right? They're small with a puffy face, head molding. That means that as they're being pushed through the birth canal, their head is squozen to fit, so it doesn't really look right, okay? The fontanelle, that is these spaces between between tissue so that the baby can compress. And the vernix is this gross stuff all over. That waxy substance all over the baby, that's vernix. And then the last piece is that the baby has a big head, right? So small with a puffy face, head molding so the head's weird. They're kind of squished in because they have that fontanelle, those spaces between where their bones and their tissue is developed. The vernix, that waxy substance all over their body, and they have a very big head. What we expect newborns to do, these are their psychological states: sleep, drowsiness, alert, awake and active, and crying. But really, they sleep the most. And this is for the first 6 months. They sleep for about 16 to 20 hours. And it's incredibly necessary because it reduces their cortisol levels. And as we know, high cortisol levels can result in a multitude of developmental differences, potentially. And then by 6 to 7 months, newborns should sleep through the night, but and this is actually all children, typical or not typical, are different. But this is about what we expect. This is more true if you're from a white, typical Western family like my own. This might be a little different if your family or the families you're working with are not white or Western. They might have their own practices. So some critical behaviors that we look at. We start with reflexes, grasping, maro, that's arms raised, right? Rooting is when babies are looking, it's when they're looking for the nipple, basically. So if a baby is hungry, they're going to start looking for that nipple. Sucking when they're actually sucking on something, and then of course walking. So those are the reflexes we look for. If they're not happening, then we start to grow a little bit concerned that the baby might be developing, the baby could have delays or needs. And then we have exploration. Babies do explore. They use those senses. They use touch, but especially in the beginning, they explore with their mouths. And then habituation is that idea that a baby might be excited about something and then play with an object, and then it's just not going to be exciting anymore. They've become used to it. That is habituation. However, and I put this up because I think it's important to understand attachment. And I can say this for myself. The most powerful influence on infant development is attachment. Okay, hold on. I have to. Sorry about that. I had to take a phone call. All right. So because attachment's so important, I thought rather than me blather on about it and try to articulate it well, let's watch this video. I like these particular videos, and I love videos that have illustrations because I think they are able to spend more time creating these illustrations than I can create animations on a weekly basis, at least right now while I'm new. So let's check out this video.
The attachment theory argues that a strong emotional and physical
I didn't have my volume.
The attachment theory argues that a strong emotional and physical bond to one primary caregiver in our first years of life is critical to our development. If our bonding is strong and we are securely attached, then we feel safe to explore the world. We know that there is always that safe base, which we can return to any time. If our bond is weak, we feel insecurely attached. We are afraid to leave or explore a rather scary-looking world, because we are not sure if we can return. People who are securely attached are said to have greater trust, can connect to others, and as a result are more successful in life. Insecurely attached people tend to mistrust others, lack social skills, and have problems forming relationships. There is one type of secure attachment, and there are three types of insecure attachments: anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and anxious disorganized. In responses to distress, the first three react organized, while the last acts disorganized. To understand the theory better,
And I can tell you myself that I was not the first. I was anxious, disorganized, sadly.
let's look at Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who have 4 children: Luca, Anne, Joe, and Amy. The Smiths are lovely parents who cuddle, make frequent eye contact, speak warmly, and are always there for their kids. But one day, Mr. Smith falls very sick and dies. For Mrs. Smith, life now becomes very difficult. She spends all day working, while at the same time trying to care for her children. An impossible task. At 6 years of age, Luca's brain is for the most part developed, his character strong and his worldview shaped. The new situation does not affect him much. He knows there is still always Mum, his safe haven. He feels securely attached. Later, he turns into a trusting and optimistic young man. His self-image is positive. Anne, who is 3, has problems coping with the new lack of attention. To Anne, her mother now acts unpredictably. She is anxious about their relationship and as a result becomes clingy. To get her mum's attention, she has to raise her emotional state and scream. When her mum finally reacts with a predictable response, she herself acts ambivalent and doesn't show her true feelings. Later in life, others think Anne is unpredictable or moody. Her self-image is less positive. Her attachment style is anxious ambivalent. 2-year-old Joe spends his days with his uncle, who loves him, but thinks that a good education means being strict. If little Joe shows too much emotion or is too loud, his uncle gets angry and sometimes punitive. This scares Joe. He learns that to avoid fear, he has to avoid showing his feelings, also in other situations. As an adult, he continues this strategy and has problems entering relationships. His image of himself is rather negative. His attachment is anxious avoidant.
And this is my brother, which he would never say, but I can say as his sister, he is anxious avoidant and does not show. He is extremely uncomfortable with emotion.
Amy, who is just 1 year old, gets sent to a nursery. The staff there is poorly trained, overworked, and often very stressed. Some are outright abusive. Amy therefore becomes anxious of the very people she seeks security from, a conflict which totally disorganizes her ideas about love and safety. As she is experiencing fear without resolution, she tries to avoid all social situations. As an adult, she thinks of herself as unworthy of love. Her self-image is very negative. Her attachment is anxious disorganized. Our attachment is formed in the very first years of our lives, a time when we are too young to communicate our anxiety and as a result can experience high levels of stress. Then our adrenal gland, an organ sitting on top of our kidneys, produces the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol. The heart rate increases, the blood pressure goes up, and we become alert. If that happens frequently, it is called toxic stress. Toxic because it impairs the development of a child's brain and weakens the immune system. In embryos or at a very young age, toxic stress can even switch the expressions of genes, which can affect our health many decades later.
And this is some of what we talk about when we're talking about um, some genes that have a tendency to be turned on. Some of these relate to like addiction. They can be turned on by these types of situations. That's one of those examples where there's a real almost dance between genetics and the environment.
By simulating a strange situation, we can assess an attachment style already by the age of 1. To do this, we let the child play with their mother for a few minutes inside a room. Then the child is left alone. The key moment is the child's reaction when her mother returns. Securely attached children first usually hug their mother, then can calm down and eventually get back to playing. Insecurely attached children can be ambivalent and avoidant. Some can't stop crying or refuse to continue playing. The long-term effects of our attachment in the early years are well documented. Using the theory, researchers at Minnesota University were able to predict already at age 3 if a child would drop out of high school with 77% accuracy. In another study, undergraduates at Harvard were asked to assess how close they felt to their parents. 35 years later, they were asked about their health. 91% of those who said they had a rather broken relationship with their mother were also diagnosed with health issues, including coronary artery disease, hypertension, and alcoholism. For those that had reported a warm relationship, the figure of poor health diagnosis was just 45%. But there is another reason why the early years deserve special attention. They are the starting place for subsequent behaviors. A kid that feels securely attached at age 2 can make friends at kindergarten. Their worldview gets reinforced with every interaction, and they develop optimism. As a result, they make good relationships at school, then at college, and later at work. Highly insecurely attached children can miss out on this opportunity. Psychologist John Bowlby, a pioneer in attachment theory, allegedly said, "What cannot be communicated to the mother cannot be communicated to the self." In other words, those who feel insecurely attached might not quite understand themselves. To get to know who they are and what they feel, they might have to go way back in time.
So that's a very thorough video on why attachment is important, how attachments form, and what happens later in life if we don't have that secure attachment. To me, it's very important. I guess because personally I can identify my own attachment. And although, again, I've discussed my own parents, my mother, extremely loving and nurturing, my father was not. But what impacted my attachment was actually the fact that because of my parents' financial situation, they sent me to a home childcare, which was much more inexpensive. Now, childcare in the late 80s was much less expensive than it is now. But my parents couldn't even afford, a daycare center. So they went for a home childcare. And unfortunately, not only was I not with my own parents for the majority of my childhood, I was in a home daycare with a person who also was not very well adjusted, and the family was not well adjusted. So it wasn't the greatest environment for me or my brother. And now my mom feels extreme guilt, and she did the best that she could, is what we talk about. And she's shown remorse. My mom understands the mistake, but I can't hold her to it because I don't think she had a choice, right? but it did have quite an impact on me, and I did not develop a secure attachment, and it did impact my later relationships. So I say this not only from what the research has said, but from my own personal experience. So these attachment is less likely to be something that leads someone into early intervention services, but social emotional differences definitely can. Oh, I apologize for not creating an animation. This is a lot of information at once. So I wanted to make sure everyone had all of this information. What is early intervention again, and why am I introducing it to you? It is a federally funded and state funded, but state implemented program. So the way each state runs it is different. And I can attest to this as someone who's been involved in early intervention in Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and North Carolina. Just one example, in Rhode Island, at least while I was working 10 years ago, Rhode Island early intervention was free to all families. There was no cost. And even if there were copays for specific visits, those copays were typically covered by the state. So early intervention is for our youngest children. It's for individual children who are birth to 3 years old. And that marker is on the third birthday. That child can no longer qualify for early intervention. Children can qualify if they have a developmental delay or delays. That depends on the state. So that could be a language delay. So you have a 2-year-old who has no speech, no communication, or you could have no scanning or tracking. So we notice that we're not seeing the same visual skills, and we'll get to that in a second. But also a child will qualify if they have a documented disability. So we know there are those disabilities that are completely genetically determined. Down syndrome is one of them. That's a chromosomal abnormality. Angelman's syndrome is another. Those qualify for early intervention. If a child has a diagnosis of autism by 2, that will qualify for early intervention. And then in some states, there are at-risk factors, where if a set of at-risk factors, in New Hampshire, it's 3. I don't remember what it is in Rhode Island. I'll have to look again. At-risk factors relate really to environmental components. Socioeconomic status. If the child is in a homeless shelter, if the child is in foster care, if the child was born with withdrawal. Those types of things, although withdrawal will automatically for the most part, but those types of at-risk factors that have been shown or linked to developmental delays and disabilities can, in some states, qualify a child, but not all states elect to use those. That is not a requirement according to the federal government. And the idea is we are going to intervene early to address this gap. Oh, see, and I wrote this wrong, between typical and atypical, and I'm going to fix this. Typical and atypical development. So what do they do? Well, there is a team, and a team will typically evaluate. I should write that. Hold on. This is what happens when I'm writing these slides. I want to make sure that I have everything. Evaluation. And that should be interdisciplinary. So that means that a child is evaluated by an educator and an occupational therapist, or a speech and language therapist and a physical therapist. They have to represent 2 different kind of career paths. And if they're found eligible, then the team will create the Individualized Family Services Plan, or IFSP. Sorry. The team always consists of a service coordinator, parent, caregiver, legal guardian, and then whoever is named as a related service provider who will be providing services. So that could be a speech therapist, that could be a physical therapist, that could be an educator like myself. They would make the team. And what is unique about early intervention, and I might adjust this slide to look a little bit nicer, is that the individualized family services plan is created in the home with the family, typically immediately after the evaluation if the child is found eligible, to ensure that it is based on what we found in the evaluation, but also that we are working with the family to create something that they agree with. That service will run for 6 months, and then there's a reevaluation. What is unique to early intervention that is unlike any other program for individuals with disabilities is that it is family-centered. So schools are child-centered because we don't see the family every day. So we have to focus on the child, the whole child. In early intervention, we are looking at the family routines. How is the family involved with that child? And that also means that services are not provided directly to the child. Typically, early interventionists are coaching parents. They are teaching parents how to use strategies, practices, tips and tricks that can support their child to bridge this gap between atypical and typical development. And it always occurs in the natural environment. So, yes, there will be situations where a parent cannot stay home with their child and the child is attending is at a daycare center. If that is the case, then that is treated as the natural environment because the child is there, 30, 40 hours a week. So what happens is then an early intervention provider will go into that child care center and work with the child care providers in teaching them the skills to support children. One more piece I want to mention. A service coordinator in early intervention might not provide service. They are really ensuring that the family is receiving all the supports that they are entitled to according to the plan. They make sure that the team, if it's an educator, a PT, and an OT, and the parent are all on the same page. And they see the parent regularly to make sure that services that are delivered are of satisfaction to that parent. And actually, this is something I would like more people actually at the community college level to be involved in because we have a lot of turnover in early intervention. And we need people who are able to work directly with parents and children. Why does this matter now? Because if you are someone in a child care center, which I know many of you are, or if you work with family members, you should be observing child development. Pediatricians are required to screen all children by 6 months, and then again regularly at 9 months, 12 months at their checkups. There are specific screenings for autism that also occur during that time, but really it's the 6-month screening that's the start. If the screening shows the child is at risk for a developmental delay or disability, then they're typically referred to their EI program, a local EI program. Intervention. So those are, when I say intervention, if you are unsure of what that means, I'm talking about a treatment. So because we're not in a medical field, we are in a helping field. We are working with children. We don't want to use a medical term, but the term that would be used is treatment. What are we doing to address this difference? So we create these interventions, which is a strategy that could be a comprehensive strategy that has a lot, like a whole manual to how to use it, or it could be something very basic like modeling. That is an intervention, modeling to a parent, modeling to a child how to perform a specific skill. These are how we address these delays and support families and children. And the reason we focus on early intervention, the reason so much we in the field are like funding, because we know this is when the brain is developing most rapidly and is elastic. It's when we can make changes that will be more permanent in the long term, and it will be easier to make those changes. If we don't, typically those gaps in atypical and typical development widen. They become learning disabilities or something else later on in schooling. So the more children the more families and children we can address or treat or intervene on early in life, the better the longer term outcomes will be. So if you are someone working in some sort of childcare, or if you're someone, maybe you're interested in this field, and this is a field I've worked in, this is a field I love. This is a big part of early childhood that people don't know about or forget, but it's very important. So if you are working with children who are 1 or 2 years old and you have concerns, be careful. Because as our book has mentioned, as I have mentioned, typical development and milestones are based on these normative charts. Normative charts are based on white middle-class children. Thus, if we are doing these screenings, we might not be taking into account potential cultural differences. However, as someone who has worked and understands the diagnostic process in autism, there have been a lot of issues with Black and brown children who are getting diagnosed far too late because doctors will use a wait and see approach more often with these families than with white upper middle class families. And that is problematic because then we have our Black and brown children not receiving the needed services they should be. We don't want parents to be alert, but if we are concerned or if we think there's a delay, we need to start having conversations. We need to learn more about family dynamics and functioning. And this will help us learn, is this cultural? Is this developmental within their own cultural milestones? Or is this truly a developmental difference? Should we consider an early intervention referral? Should we consider a referral for an evaluation for something like autism? So just be aware of this. It's important to develop relationships before we think we need to suggest something like, referral for services. But we don't want to wait too long because it's such an important critical period, and missing out could be detrimental. All right, so now we have an idea of what happens if development is atypical. So let's look at, or start to look at, some infant toddler development specific to physical health and motor skills that we should pay attention to. So first things first, what we know about babies, they grow fast. So they are 12 inches in length by the end of their first year, and from birth to their first birthday, they're 4 times the weight they were. Also, their legs and trunk will catch up with their head by the end of year 1. And they'll have a decrease in baby fat. They also will have an increase in muscle tissue, bone tissue, and neural growth, okay? Here's I was going to do more about these these milestones in infants, but I thought, why don't we watch a video that can do a quick summary with pictures? Again, I love using pictures more than anything else, so I would prefer to use pictures for this, or use a video for this. That's And I like that. So I love that this video also points out that some babies never crawl. It's very true, especially I've noticed more and more these days. I notice especially children, and this is not true for all, but children who are on the spectrum or have clear sensory needs, they hate crawling on their belly and they will use other means to get around. I've seen a lot of kids scoot on their bottom using their legs. But so this is one where we pay attention and we look for it, but it might be that your child doesn't crawl or that a child So I like that, very brief. I want to caution that a lot of parents who've had more than one child will compare and think that if another child isn't doing the same as the other, then there must be something wrong. I'll use my nieces. This is the most recent example. My older niece, who is now 3, she started walking at like 8, 9 months. Or at least standing, and she was a mover very early on. And so my sister-in-law was certain that her second kiddo was absolutely going to be walking at the same time, and it turns out she wasn't. She was a crawler, and she used the walkers, but something that her older sister never did was really use walkers. She was just walking and cruising very early on. Whereas it took at least a year before Kira, my younger niece, really started walking. And now she's all over the place, right? Her development to me as someone who's studied this looks very typical, similar to her older sister, but their paths were very different. Something to keep into account. It's very common for parents to compare children. They just need to know that each child is different, has different motivations, and has a different path. I forgot I made these slides. So let's think about, so senses are one piece of it too. So let's think about vision. Tracking, these are things that are developed by one. That's following moving objects. And then scanning is looking over the features of an object. Do you like that? This is actually, if children are not tracking or scanning, this can be an early sign of autism. And more often it's tracking and scanning people, not necessarily always objects, or objects that people are holding. So this early sign, not definitive. This is crazy. Hearing is developed in the womb by 26 weeks. So babies can hear all that they're supposed to hear by that time. Taste. Taste is also developed before birth. They can taste sour, bitter, salty, sweet, And this is for neutral, which I didn't even know. I was like, what do I put for neutral? So neutral, things that don't really have a flavor, which I mean, water is neutral, although we don't really give babies water until they're old enough. But that's one example. And then with our nose, they can smell both unpleasant and pleasant smells. They can make that, they can distinguish between those two. And then touch, babies can distinguish between different textures, body parts, and they feel pain. There was once this belief that babies didn't feel pain. That has been proven false. Babies do feel pain. I think it's just when we don't have the words to do it, we just make assumptions that we shouldn't. All right. So, oh, that was good. I feel like that was a quicker one than I've done in a while. That's enough for now. I might have a longer one next week, but I was kind of behind this week from being sick. Let's talk about what did we do today, as I like to do this, and I haven't done this in a minute. So what did we do today? Well, we talked about course updates, stay on track with observations and quizzes, right? Key points on newborns. Oh, so much. We talked about reflexes, exploration, and habituation. Cool. We talked about attachment theory and how important it is. It's a lifelong impact. And then we briefly went through early intervention. Why does it exist? And what is it? And then we started talking about typical infant, toddler development. And specifically, we talked about health, so the 5 senses. Well, I put 5, but in my world of autism, we actually have 7. I'll talk about that another day. And then motor skills. All right. So that's what we talked about today. That's it. After that, please complete your exit ticket and you will be all set. Thank you for listening.